Tonight we drift gently through the long dark of the far future, where stories are not told through pages or memories, but carried on the wind like songs of old. Some tales crash like thunder, and others hum like quiet rain. The story of the white scars is like a breeze that changes direction with every breath, full of motion and silence, strength and reflection. This is not just a story about war. It is about where people come from, how they grow apart, and what they choose to keep when everything around them changes. In the galaxy of Warhammer 40,000, everything is harsh and loud. But here, we follow a different path. We ride with warriors who do not shout, who do not stay still. We follow the ones who chose the open road and the quiet of thought. We follow the white scars. Their journey begins on a world of dust and sky and ends somewhere beyond the stars, where freedom and fate pull in different directions. So breathe in slowly. Let your mind settle. Let your eyes grow heavy. And let us begin, not with the battle, but with the wind that led them there. In the vast universe of Warhammer 40,000, things often seem like a giant wall of noise and fire. Armies crash together, planets fall, monsters rise, heroes are lost. But beneath all that, hidden in the cracks between the battles, are stories that move more like rivers or shadows. The story of the White Scars is one of those. They are a Space Marine legion. That means they are part of a group of super soldiers made by the Emperor of Mankind, who wanted to bring order to the stars. Each legion was made to follow a special way of war. Some were builders, some were hunters, some were judges. The White Scars became riders of wind and storm, but they didn't start that way. This story begins with a world called Terra, which is also known as Earth. That is where all the Space Marine legions were born, but each one was missing something. They were waiting for their Primarch. A Primarch is a being made from the Emperor's own plan, stronger and wiser than anyone else. These Primarchs were lost across the galaxy, scattered by forces beyond understanding. The White Scars Primarch was Jagatai Khan. He was not born on Terra. He was found on a world called Chogoris. Understanding the White Scars means understanding two places. One is Terra, full of cities, rules, and machines. The other is Chogoris, a world of wide skies, tall mountains, and endless steppes. Where Terra walks with iron, Chogoris runs with horses. These two worlds could not be more different, and yet they had to become one when the White Scars Legion was formed. But even when people try to become one, they carry the past with them. The warriors of Terra brought structure. The warriors of Chogoris brought spirit. These two ways began to pull against each other, like wind pushing against stone. The divide between them became something more than just ideas. It became part of who the White Scars were. This story will not focus on giant battles or impossible weapons. It will follow quiet choices, long rides across forgotten lands, and the growing space between brothers. It will take us through the stars, across deserts and frozen cliffs, through silence and noise. You will hear about Jagatai Khan and the White Scars. You will learn where they came from and where they chose to go. But most of all, you will feel what it means to chase freedom in a world that tries to take it away. Now we begin. Long before the White Scars raced across the stars, before their name was known and their thunder echoed on battlefields, there was only the V Legion. They were one of 20 groups of warriors created on Terra by the Emperor. They had no home beyond their cold halls and no identity beyond the tasks they were given. They were precise and silent, efficient but without a face. The Emperor used them during the Unification Wars to bring Earth under his control, and they followed his orders without question. These warriors were strong, shaped by gene science and war. They moved like shadows, completed missions quickly, and never hesitated. Still, they had no symbol, no song, no culture. They were sharp tools, but nothing more. They obeyed the Emperor because he was the only thing they knew. He made them, led them, and gave them purpose. But they were waiting for something else, something deeper. They did not know it, but they were waiting for their Primarch. In time, each legion would be reunited with its Primarch. These leaders had been flung across the galaxy as infants, scattered by forces beyond even the Emperor's understanding. Each one grew up on a different world. Each one became shaped by that world. When a Primarch returned to his legion, he brought something powerful and personal. He brought a new way of being. The V-Legion's Primarch was found on a faraway planet called Chogoris. It was a world of wide steppes and tall peaks. Its people lived in riding tribes, following the winds and the herds. Life there was hard, but full of movement and honor. The one who would become Jagatai Khan was raised by a man named Ogedei. He learned the way of the hunt, the bow, the sword, and the open sky. Back on Terra, the V-Legion kept fighting. They were often sent to the hardest places. They had no color on their armor, no special name, just numbers. The fifth. That was what they were. And even as other legions found their Primarchs and began to change, the V-Legion remained the same. They served without pride or sorrow, but something in them, maybe deep inside their blood or deeper still, kept them restless. When the Emperor finally found Jagatai Khan on Chogoris, he did not speak much. Neither did the Khan. But there was understanding. Two men, both full of silence and power, saw each other clearly. The Khan agreed to lead his legion, not out of duty, but because the stars had begun to call. And so the V-Legion changed. They were given a new name, the White Scars, a symbol of speed and strike. Their armor turned white, trimmed with red and gold. But this was more than a name. The Khan brought with him the ways of Chogoris. He did not force them. He lived them. Slowly, the Legion began to shift. Where once they moved in quiet formations, now they moved like storms. Where once they waited for orders, now they trusted instinct. Where once there was only the Emperor's voice, now there were stories and songs, prayers to the wind, symbols on helmets that meant brotherhood or fate. Some Terran warriors were unsure. They had lived their whole lives in the old way. They had been taught that control was strength, that silence was power. But the Khan's way was not noise. It was movement. Not chaos, but freedom. The Legion began to feel alive. They raced across the stars, striking quickly, vanishing like wind. The new warriors who joined them came from Chogoris. They had grown up like the Khan, knowing the saddle, the bow, the code of honor. They understood the sky like others understood steel. These new recruits brought spirit to the Legion. The Terrans brought skill. For a time they fought side by side, not as one people, but as one purpose. They were still the Emperor's soldiers, but they were becoming something more. The White Scars became known for their speed, not just in war but in thought. They saw paths others missed. They struck before others were ready. They left before the smoke had cleared. Other legions looked at them with confusion or awe. To some, they seemed wild. To others, they were the future. The Khan did not care what others thought. He followed the wind, and his legion followed him. But the past was not so easy to leave behind. The Terrans and Chogorians stood together, but they did not always understand each other. The divide was small at first. A word here, a custom there. But it was growing, even as the Legion grew stronger. Still, in these early days, the White Scars found something precious. Not victory, not control, but identity. They were no longer just tools. They were warriors with a path, a people with a voice, a storm with a name. The wind of unity had begun to blow, and though it would not always be peaceful, it had begun to shape them into who they would become. Far across the stars from Terra, there was a world with wide open skies and fields that went on without end. That world was Chogoris. It did not shine like a city. It breathed like a wind. The people there did not build towers. They built tents that moved with the seasons. They did not ride tanks. They rode horses across the plains with bows on their backs and stories in their hearts. This world would shape the one who would later become a leader of legends. A child fell from the stars into this land. He was not born as other children are. He arrived in a metal pod that split the sky and crashed down like a comet. The people of Chogoris believed this child was touched by the heavens. He was found by a man named Ogade, the leader of a noble tribe. Ogade raised the boy as his own and named him. From the start, the boy was different. He learned to ride before he could walk. He could read the sky by the clouds and the grass by the wind. His hands moved fast, but his mind moved faster. He spoke little, but when he did, people listened. He watched everything. He learned from everyone, and when the time came, he began to teach others in return. Life on Chogoris was not peaceful. The tribes fought for land, honor, and survival. Some were just. Some were cruel. The boy, now growing older, saw these fights not as a game but as a pattern. He began to shape that pattern. He showed his people how to fight smarter, move quicker, live freer. He spoke of honor, not just as a word, but as a way of breathing. And those who followed him saw something more than a warrior. They saw a future. He became known as a hunter of tyrants. He moved like wind and struck like lightning. One by one, the cruel lords who ruled with fear began to fall. He did not rule like them. He did not build walls or gather gold. He gave land back to the people. He made sure the fastest riders led the way, not the loudest voices. And when they tried to name him king, he smiled and asked instead to be called Kagan, a title that meant leader of many, not ruler of all. The boy who fell from the stars had become Jagatai Khan. Though many leaders would have stopped, proud and content, Khan looked to the sky. He always wondered where he had come from. He remembered dreams of stars, echoes of a place before memory. He did not know it yet, but those dreams were the Emperor's voice, calling him home. When the Emperor came to Chogoris, it was not with armies or threats. He came with understanding. The meeting between the two was quiet. No long words, no commands. Only a look between them that spoke of shared weight. The Emperor offered a place among the stars. Khan accepted because the wind had shifted. It was time to ride again. Khan did not leave Chogoris behind. He brought it with him. In his mind, in his style, in the stories he shared with his new legion. When he took command of the V-Legion, they were still soldiers of terror, trained in cities, shaped by rules. But the Khan brought the open step into their hearts. He did not teach them to follow. He taught them to understand. He showed them that speed was not just movement. It was thought. It was seeing before others did, and being gone before they arrived. He told them that honor was not found in shouting, but in action. That strength meant nothing without direction. His warriors began to change. They added symbols from Chogoris to their armor. They rode on bikes like they rode on horses. They trained not just to kill, but to dance with battle. Not everyone understood the Khan. Some thought he was too silent. Others thought he acted without care. But those who served under him knew better. He watched everything. He chose his moments. He trusted his instincts. And he trusted those who followed him to do the same. He did not hold them close. He gave them space to grow. He also brought pain, not through anger, but through choice. When he began to change the Legion, some of the older Terran warriors felt lost. They had lived by a different code, one built in stone. The Khan's code was written in clouds. They respected him but struggled to follow. Still they stayed, hoping to understand. The new recruits, those from Chogoris, filled the ranks with joy and pride. They knew the ways of the wind. They laughed around fires. They whispered songs before battle. They painted their armor with symbols of home. To them, the Khan was more than a leader. He was the echo of their ancestors. He was the rider who never fell. As the white scars grew, they became known not just for their speed, but for their silence. They came and went like storms. They did not seek praise. They did not stay behind. They trusted their own path, and that path led always forward. The Emperor was pleased with their work, though he did not always understand their ways. Other legions watched them from a distance, unsure what to make of their sudden strikes and their sudden silence. Still the Khan rode on, always forward, always faster. His legion began to reflect not just Chogoris, but him. Thoughtful, wild, focused, alone, but never lost. Khan never stopped thinking about his home world. He sent warriors back there, not to rule, but to listen. He built no castles. He left no statues. He asked only that his people remain free, and they did. The wind on Chogoris still carried his name, but even there, the world was beginning to change. The stars had pulled him away, and now they pulled harder. For all his quiet strength, the Khan felt the weight growing. His legion was strong, but something inside it was breaking. The Terran-born and Chogorian-born fought side by side, but they saw the stars in different ways. One group looked up and saw duty. The other looked up and saw a path. The divide had not yet become a wound, but it was no longer just a line. It was a space between hearts. The Khan knew this. He saw it growing. And still, he rode on. There was more to come. The storms had not yet begun. And so ends this chapter of wind and memory. Jagatai Khan, the star-born sun, had found his place among stars. But his legion was still learning what it meant to follow a rider who refused to stay still. When Jagatai Khan took command of the V-Legion, something began to shift, not only in its methods, but in its soul. Before him, the Legion had followed a straight path, strict and silent, shaped by the rules of terror. After him, they began to move with curves, like wind weaving through grass, flowing with instinct more than order. This was not a sudden change. It was like ice melting under sunlight, slow and quiet, but steady. Chogoris had not just given the Khan a name, it had given him rhythm, and now that rhythm entered the hearts of his warriors. They learned to fight with speed, not just as a tactic, but as a way of life. They trained their minds to act without waiting. They rode into battle not as a wall, but as a wave that rose and broke before anyone could catch it. This style seemed strange to those who watched from afar. Many thought it was wild, but it was not wild. It was free. The name White Scars became more than a name. It became a sign. It told others that something fast was coming, something sharp, something that did not stay in one place. Their white armor was no longer blank. It held marks from Chogoris, signs painted by hand, symbols of wind and storm and fire. These were not decorations. They were voices. They told of tribe, battle, family. Each warrior wore his story on his chest and carried it into the stars. The Legion also changed how it moved through war. Before the Khan, missions were planned step by step. After the Khan, they planned with feeling. They still had structure, but they trusted their thoughts in the moment. They learned to read a battlefield like a hunter reads a trail. They found weak points and struck without warning. They never stayed to see what fell. They were already gone. Vehicles became just as important as armor and weapons. The White Scars used bikes, not for show, but as extensions of themselves. These bikes were not slow machines. They flew across ground like living things, fast and quiet. With them, the warriors became part of the storm. In open fields or broken cities, they moved faster than thought. Enemies could not aim before the riders were gone. Where others marched, the Scars flew. But not all warriors felt at ease. Many of the older Terran-born Astartes had been trained a different way. They knew order and long sieges, shields and walls, patience and plan. Some of them looked at the new tactics with caution. Some respected the Khan, but feared losing what they had been taught. These warriors did not speak out loudly, but they watched. They waited. They wondered what their place would be in this growing wind. The Chogorian-born, on the other hand, felt something deep inside them awaken. They had grown up riding across steppes and training in tribes. The Legion's new ways felt like home. For them, the bike replaced the horse, but the path was still the same. They could breathe in battle, not just survive it. They trusted in the Khan completely, not because he was their leader, but because he understood what they were without needing words. Even the rituals began to change. In place of strict, cold gatherings, there were fires. Warriors told stories of their hunts and shared dreams of windswept plains. Songs were sung short and sharp, not always joyful, but always true. There were new chants before battle, not to gods, but to ancestors and the spirits of motion. The old Terrans watched, sometimes joining in, sometimes standing apart. That distance was quiet, but real. The White Scars were not just becoming faster, they were becoming deeper. The Khan taught them that war was not the only path. Between fights, they were encouraged to read, to learn from other worlds, to think about why they fought. Some took to this with joy, others struggled, but it gave them something rare among Space Marines: thoughtfulness. They became a legion that could vanish in battle and still speak with wisdom when the swords were silent. It was not always easy to balance the past and the present. The divide between old and new was growing like a fault line under the soil. But above that, the surface was strong. Battles were won. Enemies were confused. The White Scars became trusted by the Emperor, valued for their speed and their silence. When there was a problem no one else could reach in time, the White Scars were sent. They arrived like lightning. They left like breath. As the Great Crusade pushed farther into space, the Legion proved again and again that it could be more than fast. It could be wise. The Khan was not a loud speaker, but when he spoke, his thoughts were sharp as a blade. He questioned what others accepted. He asked why, even when others were afraid to. That made some of the other Primarchs uneasy. They did not always understand him. They respected his skill, but they could not always see where his path led. Still, the Khan was not seeking approval. He was looking forward. He wanted his legion to become its own spirit, not a mirror of another. He let his warriors make choices, trusting they would carry the values he had shown them. That freedom gave the legion life. It also gave it tension. Inside the White Scars, there were now two streams. One flowed from Terra, one from Chogoris. They both moved fast. Both fought well. But they looked at the stars through different eyes. The Terran stream valued duty and old ways. The Chogorian stream followed instinct and open skies. As long as they moved in the same direction, the legion held strong. But winds can turn, and when they do, even brothers can lose sight of each other. For now, though, the legion rode as one, fast, fierce, thoughtful, a blade in motion, a storm on wheels, a name that whispered across systems and left only silence behind. As the years passed and the great crusade grew darker, the white scars stood ready, not just to fight, but to choose, to decide who they were, what kind of legion they would become, and who they would follow when the stars began to fall. This chapter closes with a breath held tight. The storm has not yet broken, but the clouds are starting to gather. The next winds will not bring change alone. They may bring a choice no one is ready for. The white scars move through the stars like streaks of light, fast and distant, always arriving where others could not. To outsiders, they looked united, a perfect storm of speed and precision. But inside their own ranks, a quiet pressure had begun to build. It did not roar or break, but like wind pushing against a mountain, it kept growing. Beneath the smooth surface of victory, the legion had begun to feel its own weight shifting. The divide between Terran-born and Chogorian-born Astartes was no longer hidden. In every camp, there were signs. In the way warriors stood, in the words they used, in how they looked at the Khan. The Terrans remembered the old ways, the early wars, and the cold order of terror. They were shaped by cities, by strict chains of command, by silent discipline. They had followed the Emperor from the start and felt shaped by his vision. The Chogorians followed a different wind. They came from tribes that valued honor above rules and balance over power. They trusted instinct. They lived for motion. They listened to spirits in silence and read meaning in stars and storms. For them, war was a dance and a story, not just a job or a duty. At first, these two ways could still walk beside each other. The Legion had a clear mission. The Great Crusade pulled them forward. There was always another planet, another battle, another reason to ride together. But battles do not always keep people close. Sometimes they hide what is drifting apart. Among the Terran warriors, some began to feel like ghosts in their own legion. They spoke in meetings and found fewer listening. They offered strategies shaped by past victories, but were told they moved too slow. They carried traditions no one else remembered. They trained hard, fought well, and kept their armor clean, but they could feel the shift. They were becoming pieces of a story that was no longer about them. They did not hate the Chogorians. Most even admired their speed and fire. But respect does not always stop pain. Watching a way of life vanish while still inside it is like breathing thin air. You can survive, but not fully. Some Terrans began to hold their silence longer. Others grew sharp in speech. A few whispered among themselves, not of betrayal, but of memory, of what was once their legion. The Chogorians, meanwhile, filled the ranks with joy and energy. They shared food and stories, painted their armor with pride, carried totems from home, and believed they were shaping something true. They looked to the Khan not just as a leader, but as the voice of their world in the stars. Many did not understand the weight the Terrans carried. Others noticed but stayed quiet, unsure how to bridge a gap that felt older than either side. Jagatai Khan knew all of this. He saw everything. He noticed the long looks, the missed greetings, the subtle tension during training. But he did not try to stop it with commands. That was not his way. He believed that freedom meant letting people carry their truths. He also knew that forcing unity could break something forever. So he watched and waited, hoping that shared battles would keep hearts tied. Still, his own heart carried worry. He had tried to blend two rivers, but they did not always flow the same. He loved terror as the Emperor's dream, He loved Chogoris as the breath that gave him meaning. But standing between the two had made him a bridge, and bridges carry weight from both sides. He held that weight without showing it. He fought in war zones others feared. He led charges that left enemies broken before they could react. He kept the white scars riding strong, but inside, he asked questions he never spoke aloud. Can two paths truly walk together without losing one? Can honor be shared if it means different things? The pressure rose during the later stages of the crusade. Fewer worlds welcomed the Imperium freely. More fought back with strange weapons and darker forces. The missions grew harder. The losses became heavier. In these moments, the need for unity grew sharper. But inside the Legion, the small cracks widened. Disagreements became common in planning rooms. Some Terran commanders asked for more structure. Some Chogorian leaders asked for more speed. Orders were sometimes misunderstood or delayed. Not enough to break a battle, but enough to feel the shift. After each campaign, both sides would return to their own corners. They still shared food. They still bled together. But the space between them had stopped shrinking. The librarians of the Legion, those who studied minds and memory, felt it too. Some tried to guide the warriors toward peace with stories and meditations. Others stayed out, knowing that too much pushing might spark a deeper rift. Even the Stormseers, the mystics of Chogoris, could not fully settle the winds. One night, on a quiet world far from battle, a Terran veteran and a Chogorian scout stood guard together. They did not speak much. The stars above looked the same to both, but meant different things. One saw duty, the other saw destiny. They stood in silence, not as enemies, not as friends, but as two voices in a song that no longer had a single tune. This moment was not rare. It happened again and again, in ships and camps, during rest and during march. The Legion was not breaking, it was stretching, but stretched too far, even the strongest thread can snap. The Khan began to travel more alone. He walked quiet halls, sat in empty rooms, stood beneath cold stars. His presence was still strong, but his thoughts turned inward. He had brought his world to the stars and given it shape in steel, but he had not expected to feel so far from both worlds. Even so, he did not speak of division. He trusted the Legion to walk its own way. He believed that time and purpose would keep them whole. The war was not yet over. The stars still needed to be tamed. The dream still lived. But dreams do not always rise cleanly. Sometimes they twist before they lift. And far away, beyond what the white scars could yet see, something darker was moving. Whispers of betrayal began to drift through hidden channels. Some legions were acting strange. Some messages were missing. Some battles did not end as they should. The Khan listened, but did not speak. He felt the air shift. He knew the winds were changing again, and when they did, the storm inside the white scars would not be the only one they would face. This is where the chapter closes, at the edge of change, with hearts divided but still beating in rhythm. The Legion rides on, not yet broken, not yet lost, but riding toward a future where choices will matter more than speed. In the stillness after battle, when the bikes cooled and the helmets came off, the white scars sat in silence. That silence once felt like peace, but now it was something else. A distance that stretched without words, a feeling that no one could name but many could sense. The divide between Terran and Chogorian was no longer hidden in looks or small choices. It had become something felt in the space between steps, in the way voices changed when they spoke across that invisible line. The Legion was not failing. Missions were still completed. Enemies still fell. But inside, something had begun to break in slow motion. The Terran-born Astartes had served longer. They had watched the Legion change from within. They had carried out orders before the Khan arrived. Now they watched symbols they did not understand appear on armor and heard battle cries they had never been taught. They remembered when discipline came from cold halls and sharp commands. Now they saw warriors gather around fires, speaking in their home tongue, eyes turned toward the stars as if searching for something older than the Emperor. They felt left behind, not by war, but by meaning. Their way of war had always been a ladder, each step earned. Each victory had been tied to a chain of command. Now it felt like they were walking in someone else's dream, where rules were not spoken but understood by heart, where choices came from belief instead of orders. This shift was not violent, but it left a mark. Some of the Terrans withdrew into memory. They polished their armor with more care, kept to routines even when no one watched. A few tried to lead younger warriors in drills from the early days. Others kept to themselves, speaking less, watching more. They did not rebel. They did not forget their loyalty. But their hearts held weight they could not lay down. For the Chogorian-born, the Legion was rising into itself. It was becoming what it had always been meant to be. They followed the Khan not as a distant leader, but as a living guide. They wore their traditions with pride, not to erase others, but to breathe life into the Legion's spirit. The white armor now held meaning that went beyond war. The symbols were not just for show. They were for memory, for family, for ancestors watching from above. These warriors did not push the Terrans out, but they did not slow down either. They ran forward, sure of their place, sure of their path. Between both sides, the space widened, not with anger, but with silence. Meals were taken in separate groups. Training lines formed without being told. Voices fell quiet when certain names were mentioned. The Khan saw all of this, as he always did. His presence still carried strength, but even he could not stand between every word or walk beside every heart. He remained a rider between two roads, and each day those roads pulled farther apart. In planning rooms, old arguments grew colder. Some Terran commanders insisted on slower strikes, more data, more control. Chogorian leaders pushed for movement, surprise, and spirit. The strategy still worked, but the harmony had faded. Each success now carried tension beneath it. Each loss raised the question of whether unity still lived. Jagatai Khan did not raise his voice. That was never his way. Instead, he let the Legion breathe through this divide, trusting that those who remembered the wind would not let it break. But the storms outside the Legion had begun to press harder. News reached them of other legions acting in strange ways, rumors of disobedience, whispers of entire systems going silent. Reports came late or not at all. And in the midst of this noise, the white scars kept riding fast and far, but with a question growing under every order. What were they truly riding for? Terran warriors began to ask whether their loyalty was still to the Emperor, as they had once known him. Chogorians asked whether the Khan would one day turn the Legion back toward home, toward their own way of living, without the weight of the wider Imperium. These questions were not shouted in meetings. They lived quietly in the corners of thought, shaping actions in subtle ways. The divide became most clear in the moments between battle. When blood cooled and skies turned dark, the camps reflected the Legion's soul. On one side, fires burned with music and soft speech in the Chogorian tongue. On the other, a circle of stillness, voices speaking softly in the older Terran dialects. No one told them to divide, they just did, like rivers following their own path. Even the teachings began to split. The Stormseers, Chogorian psychers who guided with vision and dream, shared ideas shaped by their world. They spoke of spirits in wind, of fate as a flowing stream. The Terran librarians, more strict in thought, kept to the deeper knowledge taught by Terra's traditions. Both sides still respected one another's power, but the meaning behind it was no longer shared. It was not hate that grew, it was sorrow. A quiet sadness that two worlds, once walking side by side, now stood with eyes turned in different directions. They still fought for the same cause, but what that cause meant had begun to blur. The Khan rode between both groups, his words calm, his gaze deep. But even he knew that unity could not be forced. It had to be chosen. As the heresy began to rise in the shadows, the cracks inside the Legion grew sharper. They were not yet breaks, but they were signs. Not all Terrans would stay with the Khan. Not all Chogorians would understand those who chose to leave. The road ahead was no longer clear. The future would demand a choice, a final moment where each warrior would have to ask what truly held their loyalty. The Legion still rode together, but each ride now carried weight. Every strike, every retreat, every moment of stillness spoke louder than words, and deep in the stars, the echo of betrayal was growing louder. Soon the time would come when silence would no longer hold them together. This chapter closes at the edge of that silence, where the wind has begun to rise and the sky carries a question that only the storm can answer. The stars no longer whispered peace. Across the galaxy, strange things were stirring. Messages failed to arrive. Legions moved in secret. Planets that once praised the Emperor began to raise new banners. Some burned their loyalty without warning. Others vanished behind walls of silence. And through this growing fog, the name Horus began to echo. A name once trusted, a name now tied to something darker. Horus was the War Master. He had been chosen by the Emperor to lead the Great Crusade when the Emperor stepped away to return to Terra. That choice had been accepted without question by most, for Horus was strong and beloved. But things changed faster than the stars. No one truly saw it happen, not at first, not even the Khan. The white scars were far from the heart of the storm when the heresy began. They were deep in the Kondak system, fighting greenskins across broken plains and shattered rock. There, far from Terra, the war felt simple. Enemies to crush, worlds to free. But even simple battles cannot keep the truth away forever. The messages that did come felt wrong. Not false, but not whole. Some warned of rebellion. Others called for loyalty to Horus. Still others said nothing at all. Pieces of the puzzle floated without shape. And while other legions turned against each other, the white scars stood still in motion, caught between paths. Terran-born commanders spoke first. They had once trained beside warriors from other legions, now accused of betrayal. They heard whispers from old contacts, messages carried by broken codes. They pushed for action, for clear orders. Some even said the Khan should speak with Horus directly, to understand his side. Others warned against it. They feared a trap, or worse, a truth they did not want to hear. Chogorian-born warriors said less. They listened. They watched the Khan. They trusted that his silence meant thought, not hesitation. They believed that the wind would guide them, not through logic, but through feeling. To them, betrayal was not just an act, but a break in spirit. And something about the way these messages came, the way they avoided clear answers, felt like shadow. The Khan kept his thoughts to himself. He did not rush toward answers. He did not speak false comfort. He stood beneath the stars, far from his command post, alone on a tall rock where the wind carried nothing but silence. There, he closed his eyes. He remembered Chogoris. He remembered his tribe. He remembered that truth does not always come from words. It comes from knowing what cannot be seen. Still, the call from Horus came again, a message more direct, a request to speak, to share vision, to discuss the Emperor's choices and the future of the legions. It was not a threat. It was not even dressed in anger, but it carried weight. It asked for understanding and unity, but not of the Emperor's kind. It offered freedom, but of a different shape. The Terrans argued to answer it. Some saw a chance to learn, to protect the Legion by staying close to power. A few believed that Horus might be right, that the Emperor had kept too many secrets, that perhaps the Imperium needed change. They did not speak of rebellion, not in open words, but they spoke of questions, of balance, of doubts grown heavy. The Chogorians stood still, not in fear, but in belief. They felt the change in the stars. They saw what others missed. The balance had broken. Something dark now rode beneath the surface of Horus's voice. It was not anger. It was hunger. It did not seek peace. It sought to twist meaning. The Khan called for quiet. He gathered his commanders. He stood in the middle of the chamber, not above them, not apart. He did not shout. He did not name sides. He spoke of roads and choices. He said that every rider must know why he rides, that each wind has its end, that sometimes a path that looks easy can lead into shadow. He said that Horus had once been a brother, that trust had once been real, but now it felt like memory. What stood in front of them was no longer that brother. The messages that came were not from one voice. They carried too many hands, too many shadows behind the words. Still, he gave his warriors space to speak. They did. Some urged caution. Others warned of loss. A few wept. Not from fear, but from sorrow. The idea of fighting other legions, of turning blades toward brothers, was more than heavy. It was unthinkable. And yet, it was becoming real. The final decision came not with a vote, not with commands, but with a ride. The Khan took a small force to intercept a ship carrying messengers from Horus. He did not bring war. He brought questions. What he found on that ship changed everything. The words were calm, the voices steady, but behind the eyes, he saw something hollow. Something moved beneath the skin, something that did not belong. The men on that ship no longer spoke with hearts. They spoke with plans. They smiled with lies. The Khan left that ship in silence. He returned to his fleet and called his legion. He said they would not follow Horus. They would not turn from the Emperor. They would not ride into a future built on pride and poison. Some did not accept this. A small number, mostly Terran veterans, disappeared. Some fled, some were caught, others fell in secret duels, silent and without song. The Khan did not chase them. He mourned them. He let them go, not because he forgave, but because the road ahead had no space for half-truths. From that moment on, the White Scars rode with purpose, not just for victory, but for clarity. They would not be part of the storm that tore the Imperium apart. They would ride into it, not to join, but to cut through it. They would remain who they were, fast, true, bound by wind, not by pride. The heresy had begun, the galaxy burned, legions fell into ruin, and now the White Scars would ride, not just between stars, but between ideals, between what had been and what might remain. Their choice had been made, and it would shape every ride that followed. This chapter ends on the edge of that choice, where silence turns into movement and belief becomes direction. The storm is here now, and the riders have answered. The ride to Terra was not just a journey through space. It was the closing of a circle that had begun long before the White Scars ever wore their name. It was the final stretch of a path shaped by two worlds. Terra had given them their bones. Chogoris had given them their spirit. Now, at the end of the heresy, both parts of the Legion would be tested one last time. When they reached Terra, the siege had already begun. Horus and his traitor legions had broken through the outer defenses. The skies above the throne world were filled with wreckage. The walls of the Imperial Palace were under siege. Titans walked through fire. Thunder filled the air, but through that storm, the White Scars arrived with quiet force. They did not need to announce themselves. The sound of their engines told the defenders all they needed to know. They did not ask where to go. They saw the fight and moved toward the heart. While other legions dug in or held the line, the White Scars launched attacks that tore into the flanks of traitor forces. Their bikes rushed across ruined streets, dodging craters and wreckage. Their blades found weak points. Their minds stayed clear. And through it all, the Khan rode at the front, eyes focused not just on the battlefield, but on the meaning behind it. The Siege of Terra was not just a battle for a planet. It was the test of every belief that had shaped the Imperium, and for the White Scars, it was the test of what they had become. The divide between Terran and Chogorian had never vanished. But now, under the same sky, they stood side by side. Not because the divide was gone, but because it no longer held them apart. The Terrans who had stayed were no longer trying to bring the past back. They had seen the truth of their legion in action. They had seen how freedom, speed, and instinct could be shaped into purpose. They did not forget terror. They did not forget structure. But they had stopped resisting the wind. They had chosen to ride with it. The Chogorians did not forget the struggles that had shaped the Legion either. They did not claim victory over the old ways. They simply moved with the storm, knowing the time had come to let their actions speak. Together, both sides carried the weight of the heresy into every charge. They rode not for pride or history. They rode to protect what still remained. When Horus finally died, struck down by the Emperor himself, the war did not end. The price had been too high. The galaxy was broken. The Emperor was no longer a man, but a silent force held on the edge of life. The Imperium survived, but it would never be whole again. The White Scars returned to Chogoris. They did not ask for reward. They did not seek honors. They simply returned to where the wind still spoke in low tones across the grass. The Khan stayed with them, guiding the Legion through the ashes of war. He did not take part in the rebuilding of the wider Imperium. He saw what it was becoming, something more rigid, more controlled, more distant from the dream the Emperor had once offered. The Codex Astartes was introduced by Guilliman, a set of strict rules to control the Space Marine legions and break them into smaller chapters. Many saw it as necessary, a way to prevent another heresy. But the Khan hesitated. He saw the value in structure. He did not fear discipline, but he feared losing freedom. He feared the loss of movement, the loss of identity. In the end, the White Scars accepted some of the Codex, but not all. They followed the parts that kept them balanced in the wider Imperium. But they refused to become something they were not. They did not give up their symbols or their speed. They did not forget their fires or their silence. They became a chapter, but not a typical one. They remained riders of the storm. Jagatai Khan continued to lead until one day he vanished. It was said he went into the webway, chasing a group of dark raiders who had stolen something precious. He never returned. Some believe he was lost. Others believe he still rides, somewhere beyond sight, waiting for a time when the stars will call him home again. His legend became part of the wind, carried through stories, remembered in the rhythm of engines and the quiet before battle. After he was gone, the White Scars did not fall apart. They rode forward, shaped by his memory, holding on to the balance he had given them. Their chapter stayed close to Chogoris, taking new recruits from the steppes, still teaching them to ride, still teaching them to feel the sky before the strike. The divide between Terra and Chogoris did not vanish with time. It remained in the stories passed down, in the lessons remembered, in the way warriors trained. But now it was no longer a divide. It was a thread, pulling the past into the future. It reminded them who they were. It helped them carry both routes without choosing one over the other. The white scars became a symbol not just of speed, but of unity through motion. They showed that freedom does not mean chaos. That instinct does not mean weakness. That belief does not need to be loud to be true. They carried their culture not as armor, but as breath. And wherever they went, the sound of their engines came first, followed by silence, followed by the stories of those who had seen the storm pass by. Their legacy is not written in grand statues or long declarations. It is written in the way they ride, in the way they wait, in the way they move through a galaxy that still does not always understand them. They do not need to be understood. They need only to be true to what they are. And so the wind continues, across stars and systems, across worlds still caught in war. The white scars remain in motion, not lost, not forgotten, simply riding on, toward a future where honor runs beside freedom and silence rides beside strength. This is where the story settles, not in an ending, but in the breath between rides. The white scars are still out there, moving through the dark, their wheels humming, their blades ready. Their path is not drawn on maps, it is carried in the wind. Now the winds grow quiet. The sound of engines fades. The stories have all been told, and the night wraps them in stillness. You have followed the white scars through their long path, from the steel walls of Terra to the endless plains of Chogoris, from hidden doubts to a final charge beneath a burning sky. You have seen them grow, divide, and choose their truth in a galaxy that seldom offers peace. They were born in shadow, shaped in silence, and tested in fire. But through it all, they did not forget who they were meant to be. They did not let the storm change their spirit. They rode with purpose. They rode with memory. They rode with grace. And now they ride on, not toward an end, but toward the horizon beyond what can be seen. Still fast, still free, still faithful to the wind that gave them life. So let your breath slow. Let your thoughts soften. Let the last echoes of battle fade. You are safe now. The journey has paused, but the path continues. Somewhere, out in the stars, a white blur crosses the void, leaving no trace but peace. Sleep gently, traveler, and if the wind calls again, you will know how to follow.